Hello everybody, I'm Snipe Eye, Joshua. This is the assembly video for the Keymote control. Inside the package you receive, you should have the main PCB with most of the surface mount components soldered. You'll have a little baggie with a bunch of components in it. You'll have 3 more FR4 plates. So this is the back plate for solid cover without the battery poking through, back plate that the battery cover pokes through on, and then the plate to put the switches in. And you'll see that you can use either side of this. One side says low bat. That's where the indicator LED shines through right there, lines up with that hole. And the other side is blank if you prefer that. You should also have a small 3 AA battery holder with about 6-inch leads coming off of it. In addition to these things for your assembly, you'll need some switches. I've got some just boring, I think they're MX Blacks here. You'll need a soldering iron, of course, and some solder. You'll want some keycaps probably for the remote, but that should be it. Let's go ahead and open up the bag and see what you should have inside of there. Let's just clear out the space a little bit, and I'll just dump it. Okay, you should have 3 infrared LEDs. You should have an infrared demodulator. I'll hold this up a little bit closer to the camera so you can see what it looks like. You should have 6 nylon standoffs. So these ones have threads, internal threads on both sides, and they are, I think, 12 millimeters long, something like that. So these are the basic ones that you'll use if you want to use this back that allows the batteries to go through. Now, in addition to these 6 nylon standoffs, you should have 6 more nylon standoffs that have a small little thread. And this one is like 8 millimeters or something like that. So you will add these standoffs to the other standoffs if you want to use the solid back that doesn't let the batteries show through. You should have 12 small screws. They're all nice and mixed in there, you know, for your enjoyment, I'm sure. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect. And those screws, pretty small. You'll want a small Phillips head screwdriver to screw those in. You should have 3 jumper shunts. So these can go between jumper just like this. They just slide on, and they electrically join 2 of them. So that's this guy here. And 5 3-pin jumpers. They're just pretty standard. As well as a slide switch with 4 positions. So the very first thing that we'll want to do is start soldering on these through hole components. So that'll be the demodulator, the infrared LEDs, the switch, and the jumpers. So positionally, the switch goes right here on the edge. So with all the components coming up out of the board, that's the same orientation. You want to put the switch in, coming up out of the board. So it just goes into that slot right there. These jumpers go into these positions right here. it's a block of 3 and then a block of 2. So the purpose of these jumpers, this block of 2 right here is an ISP header, so if something goes wrong, we're able to reprogram it, even put a bootloader on it. This block of 3 is to decide whether the SPI on the chip is talking to our flash memory, which stores all your remote codes, or if it's talking to the ISP header. So for the purposes of normal remote control operation, since when this arrives to you, it'll already be programmed, you'll take your shunts and you'll put them down this block of 3 so that it's connecting the middle pins to the pins labeled flash. So just like this. So you see that it's joining all these pins on the right. So that's the correct orientation for those shunts. So you'll solder those in. The demodulator goes here at the bottom, and you see it's got kind of a little dome on one face. That dome should face outward. So you'll put it just like that. And then these infrared LEDs will go in these holes up top. And the 3 infrared LEDs mean that you can populate all 3 of these ports if you want. That means it'll use a little bit more battery when you're pressing a button or sending a signal, but the signal will go farther. So if you want a longer range remote, you can put all 3 in. Realistically, you'll probably be fine just using one of them. And if you just use one, you can populate whichever of these you want, but because I have a crippling sense of symmetry, I would probably use the center. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'll probably just put in 1, but you can put in 1 or 2 or all 3 or whatever you want. So let's go ahead and solder those things up, and then we'll show the rest of the assembly. One more note before we begin soldering here. The orientation of the LEDs is important. I mean, obviously, 3-pin headers can go in any way you want, right? But the LEDs are polar. So if you look at it from the top, you'll see one side is flatted. It's got a little divot on the side. That side has a shorter lead. And so if we flip over the remote here, you'll see that one side of the footprint here is marked with a flatted side. So those flatted sides line up. Or in other words, the shorter lead goes into the square hole. And you can solder it on like this, so we can put it into this side, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bend it forward so that it's pointing directly forward, because an LED pointing straight up in a remote doesn't make a lot of sense. You kind of want it to point forward from where you're pressing on buttons. Or you can put it in on this side. As long as the short lead goes into the square hole, you're good. So we could put it into this side as well, and again bend it forward. It really doesn't matter which way you do it. It's thin enough that it works just fine either way. But that orientation, short lead, square hole, flatted side to flatted side, that is very important, or else the LED will not light up. One more note on that, you won't actually see the LED light up because it's infrared, it's out of the human range of vision, so you won't see it light up. If you want to be sure it's working, you can look at it through a phone, and you should see it light up at that point if it's sending a signal. And the phone's filter doesn't filter out infrared wavelengths, so it'll look kind of purpley on the phone if you're looking directly at it, but it's a pretty narrow beam as well, so you want to make sure you're looking directly at it. Shorter lead to the square hole, and put in however many you want, and then just bend it so it's facing forward before you solder it. Okay, I've gone ahead and soldered all those components in, so I'll give you a quick look at the board so you can see how it's looking now. You have the infrared demodulator here for learning new signals. got all our headers here, switch here, and the LED here. And so you'll see that I just soldered it in, bent it so it's pointing forward. We're gonna put the battery connection on because it gets really difficult to solder once the switches are on. And then, but we're not gonna like glue this in place or anything quite yet. Once we've got this soldered on, we're gonna solder all the switches on through the plate. So let's go ahead and get this on. I find it's easier to trim these leads down to about 2-3 inches. You just don't need that much connection on it, so we'll get a little bit of the actual wire exposed here so it's easier to solder. And the red goes into this hole here labeled plus, and the black goes into this hole here labeled minus. So we'll put those in and we'll solder those in. Now that we've got the battery soldered in, we're going to go ahead and take our switches and we're going to insert them into the plate. So at this point you have to decide whether you want to use the plate with low bat showing or nothing showing. I kind of like this, so I'm going to leave that showing. So for each switch, they're going to get soldered on through like this. So effectively the plate will go right here. So you'll see that the switch has to be inserted so that the leads are up on the top side. So we'll just insert it into the plate like this. And we're going to go ahead and insert all of the switches into the plate. And then we can kind of insert the plate into this and then solder them all on the other side. Now that we have all the switches inserted into the plate, we can just line it up and kind of press it into the PCB. And so if we look on this other side, we should see everything start to come through. It may take a little bit of coercion to try and get everything to align nicely, but you want to make sure that all of the pins are poking through and solderable. Sometimes if a pin doesn't line up right with a hole, it might kind of get bent over or like fold a little bit, and then it's going to be really hard to access. So you just want to check over each switch once you've got this plate inserted, and you should have that much of a gap roughly. It should be according to the spec sheet 3.2 millimeters, I think, maybe 3.4 between the plate and the PCB here. But we'll just look over each switch and make sure that the pins are visible and ready to get soldered. And in this case, it's looking like they are so far. So once we're confident that each of these pins is ready to go, then we can go ahead and begin soldering. And you'll want to make sure also that it's just pressed together as much as possible. As I'm soldering these, a quick side note, these footprints and the plate are compatible with MX style switches, so Cherry, etc., and all those clones. And they're also compatible with Alps style switches, and the footprints are compatible with low profile chalk switches, but the plate holes might be too big to properly hold those. So you're welcome to try and experiment as you will, but as you're soldering these down, that's the reason why these footprints look a little bit strange or unusual. As long as you've got good contact, we don't have to fill in, for instance, this entire hole. I tend to do it anyway, just again because of my crippling sense of symmetry or OCD or whatever you want to call it. But I'm going to get these all soldered and then we'll move on to the next step. Now that we've got all the switches soldered in, you can see the solder here, we're going to go ahead and put this into the right position. The easiest way I've found to do this is actually using this plate. So whether you plan on using this plate where the batteries can show through, or this flat plate where they can't, I advise you do it this way to start. So we'll take each one of these headers, and you put it through the hole, and we'll go ahead and get the screws for each of these headers lined up. And so we'll do that for each of these holes. And then we can put this into the right position. So we'll feed this through and we'll put this into the right position. And this will help us position this exactly where it's supposed to go. Make sure that you don't have the batteries in at this point. The batteries actually cause this to expand out just a tiny bit this direction. And when you do that, it doesn't really fit through this hole when you're trying to line it up. So let's go ahead and get all of these headers in and then take that next step. Now that I have these headers in place, I'm going to take this plate and you'll insert the battery holder through it and line it up so that we can attach a couple of these headers. Now I'm just going to screw in like 2 of these, one in each corner, and that's just so that we've got it aligned properly. That aligning means that when we put the battery holder into the place, it'll be in the exact right spot. And what I'm going to use to mount this is some hot glue. You could use some double-sided sticky tape. There are a few options that'll work, but you can see 2 is enough that it's not moving. And so we'll take this wire and kind of try and loop it underneath here, kind of out of the way. And then we'll insert it in just like this and press it down. So I've got my hot glue here. Hopefully it's hot enough now to go ahead and do this. But I'll just give a generous amount here on the back. And that should be plenty. Probably way more than I need realistically, but that's okay. And I'll press it down. And we know that's all in the right spot because this plate is aligned nicely. And when this dries, or hardens enough that I can let go of it, we can put the other holes in and it's pretty much ready to go now if you want to use it with this back plate. If you'd prefer the solid back plate, what you'll do is remove this back plate that we just put on and add these, oh, I just dropped that one. Add these extensions onto each one, each of those headers. And as you do that, it'll make it tall enough that this plate can then go on it and cover up this battery holder as well. So if you prefer the solid back plate, that's what these are for. Otherwise, you don't need them. So I think we're probably good. And once you put on keycaps, this remote is ready to use. So I'll go ahead and record a different video where I show how to program the remote or teach it new codes and what various blinks on this status LED mean. So congratulations, you're ready to go.